Good morning everyone, my name is Paul. I work for a company called Micrographics. We are situated in Cape Town, South Africa, and we are an Autodesk partner. In this video blog I'd like to discuss the ability of Civil 3D to add information onto physical elements. Now, to give you a background to this, for those of you that might not have come across this before, you have in AutoCAD and AutoCAD Verticals the ability to click on a component, and there will be properties on the right hand side that applies to that component. Now, what I'd like to highlight for you is within BIM projects, because that's really what this is about. I'm investigating Civil 3D and how we can leverage the classification of elements. In a typical BIM project, we might find the following. This is a standards matrix. You can see that on the left hand side there are standards and protocols, and then there are reasons for the standards and protocols being leveraged on the projects. And when you think about a project, you must think about a three-dimensional model with three-dimensional elements, and onto these elements there can be information or classifications that are applied, and those would be listed on the left axis. In the UK and on certain projects we would have the unit class that applies. That is quite a complex and complete standard that would be leveraged in the UK, and the reasons why we might have that is that it would be for classification purposes, or it might be for facilities management. So depending on how downstream guys are going to be working with the digital twins or the models and the classifications, so we would want to do that for specific purposes. The unit class is quite an involved standard, like we mentioned, and what normally happens on a project is that we will have a Uniformat 2015 standard that is also applicable, and we might say that for classification that's going to be mandatory. Okay. And in South Africa, on some projects we have the Association for South African Quantity Surveyors, but that might be a typical way for us to work. We would use the Uniformat 2015, and then we would apply that, say, for classification. So that would be the purpose of it. Alright, so what does a standard like that look like? Well, typically how you would first be introduced to a standard like that is in conjunction with the level of detail, which says how detailed the component must be modeled, and there's something like that. And then we also have some stages. So this is according to Proxys, so I suppose most people on BIM projects worldwide would recognize this. There's also one that we created for South African conditions in ASAQS, but this is typically what the South African stages would look like. The Proxy, that would correspond typically to rebar stages within England or UK, i.e. And then what we have on the left hand side here is a standard, the Uniformat standard 2015, and you can see it's color coded, so it will start with substructure. The next, that would be A, then it would be shell, that's B, and then it would be C, which is interiors, and then it would go on to D, which is services. So, and within that, some classifications, that would be the blue, that is then further subdivided into purple, and then finally green. And this is then the coding of those classifications. So at the beginning of a project, we would typically tell guys, well, you need to model your model elements, and then you would be responsible, say, for a specific, you would be the model element author, and then that would be assigned to you at a specific date, and then depending on the stage of the project, eventually you might take ownership. Here you can see structural handing over onto architectural handing over onto structural at a specific date, and that would then become the model element author at that time. The ownership of the model will change, and the assignment of this across the disciplines is enacted according to, well, in most projects that I've seen, Uniform at 2015. It's not too detailed, but it's detailed enough for modeling purposes. And so if we were modeling, say for argument's sake, a pressure pipe network in Civil 3D, and we want to impart the relevant codes onto pipes and pipe fittings and such, then we would have to know where to find that on the standards, which would be pipes. So there we can see we've got conveyancing, we've got plumbing. All right, and then under plumbing we could probably look at domestic water distribution. It's not exactly infrastructure, but it's available, so we would use the cold water service. There's domestic water supply equipment. So D20, 20, 100, 200 and 300 might be applicable, and that would fall within domestic water distribution, and that would fall within plumbing fixtures. So it's debatable whether this standard would be relevant to infrastructure. We might have to go to a different standard, but for the purposes of demonstration, this might suffice. Within Revit, there are various ways in which people apply coding. So while this is not a blog about Revit, I'd just like to demonstrate that quickly, and then you can compare Civil 3D to this. We have within the, built into Revit, within the type properties of, say for argument's sake, a wall in the identity data, there's a built-in code that we might have from the uniformat coding is built into Revit. There's the brick cavity wall that then applies to all bricks of that type. So the coding is then imparted on that element. Then we also have these interoperability tools that are available to us. We can install them from our accounts. So over here you can see, for instance, that we've got our accounts, and in our account, our Autodesk account, we can download some extensions, and the extensions will include the interoperability tools. So that is where we can find the apps that will help us to apply the coding. And here you can see there's a lot that goes on here. This is a much more BIM platform than what Civil 3D is, but we can assign classifications using these tools. Any classifications, and all that happens is that there are some properties that are created. This is in case the ASAQS elemental code. All right. And then that, of course, is the South African quantity surveyors. Now we want to do the same thing within Civil 3D, so we'll have a look at that. With Revit, these are the tools that we've got. So this is what Civil 3D looks like. This is a pipe. If we click on that, this is the design properties. But nothing in here gives us standards or anything to choose from. There's the display. Okay, and then we get to this extended data tab, and this is where the data that we are interested in will ultimately come and appear. So by default they've got a hyperlink notes and a reference documents that you can add. And you'll see over there there's this ability to attach property sets. So that should give you a hint as to what we are looking for. within Civil 3D. There are no apps that I know of that are readily available from the downloads in the account. So if you go and have a look at your Civil 3D, if you go back to your account and you've got Civil 3D, then you can have a look and see what's available. So the one tool that I did install was the shape importer and exporter, the SHP import and export utility, but there's nothing over here that has the data that we need. Alright, so we need to create a standard, some coding for our pipes within this model. So we will be creating that standard. To do that, you go to the Manage tab, you go to Define Property Data Sets, that's on the Property Set Data panel, and that opens the Style Manager. And now you can see something interesting. There is a filter that is applied. And what is important for you to do is to uncheck the filter so that multi-purpose objects is available. And then you can see that we have classification definitions. And this is where we would like to operate. If you right click on classifications definitions, you can say new. And this is where we can put in a new style. So I'm going to put in the Uniformat 2015. And now the idea would be to populate the classification. So we can say, what does it apply to? So in our case, we want to have pipes and pipe fittings and pipe appurtenances. Or we could say, well, typically we're going to apply this to everything. So we can just select all. There's the name and the description. And there's the actual classification. Click on an element, on a style, you can right click and say add. And there's the new classification, and that is where you can then enter the coding, which in our case will start by being D. So it would be D services. So the first classification would be D and then services. Then we can right click add. Now we would like to be under 20, D20 plumbing. So that will be D20 D dot. There's the actual coding, D20, yes, D20, and that will be plumbing. And then we'll go to domestic water distribution, that is D2020. Now clearly, if you had to do this in your template, it might be best, because then every project that you do is available like this. Okay. Then we've got the D2020-100. With the description, cold water service. I don't think that we'll have hot water applicable, but let's put it in anyway. If this was around a house on Erwin or something like that, and there were some pipes that we were modeling in Civil 3D, then we might have to put this in. But 10 to 1 we would probably use a different standard, but you know, if they require this on the project, then we would have to accommodate them somehow. Oops. Let's see if we can move them. Yes, we can move them. Let's add a new classification. D2300. There's the Dometic water supply equipment. And apply. And OK. Right, so we've just created a data set, and we now want that to be applicable to all the pipes. So in Civil 3D you can select an element and say select similar. It's 14 pressure pipes that were selected, and then we'll add the data over here. Make sure that that standard, the new style, has been added, which it has already, so the uniformat coding is showing up there. And then if we click on that, it shows us there we've got uniformat services, D20 plumbing, there's cold water service, and we say OK. And there we can see we've got the uniformat 2015 coding that has now been entered in every pipe. So if we have a look at another pipe, because we selected all the pipes, that will be the coding. And then with regards to the distribution system, let's suppose that that was part of that, then with the uniformat coding, there we can say that would be something else. Okay, so that might be water supply equipment or whatever it was. But this will now allow somebody further down the line to interpret the model elements based on their coding, and that would typically happen in something like Navisworks, where we can create search sets based on elemental classifications. Well, clearly it would be beneficial to one if one were able to read and write standards from somewhere at the table into Civil 3D. And while this isn't something that I have done, I have an idea of how to do that. And that is why we have something like Dynamo. Dynamo is a visual language, node-based, that you can leverage against a lot of Autodesk software, and built into the software is this nodes. So I'm still investigating this, but under the AutoCAD node there are property sets, methods and procedures, and these are the nodes that I will be investigating to see how I can recreate a standard quickly within Civil 3D. So that's with regards to setting them up, as opposed to entering the data manually one by one, which might take a long time. And this is one of the things that I will be doing hopefully shortly, to see how I can leverage that against our templates. And then the other question would be, let's suppose that you haven't started a project from your template, or that you are working on somebody else's project and you need the coding available in there. Let's suppose, for argument's sake, that we are successful in creating our standards using Dynamo. Then how do we transfer them from one drawing to another? Now when you install these, specifically this SHP import and export utility for Autodesk Civil 3D, under the toolbox of the tool space, there is the SHP import export utilities. And this has various categories and subcategories, and there we can see that we can export a property set settings to XML and import from XML. We would right click and execute. Alright, so yeah, I'm just giving it a name of Uniformat Pipes Dataset Export. Let's save that. It's giving me that. Alright, let's go and open a new file. Alright, so after we just draw a pipe, it's just a single line display style here. You can see it's definitely a pressure pipe that we've selected. There's the design properties, but under the extended data there's no Uniformat settings, properties available to us. On the Manage tab, if we look at the property sets, we'll see that if we have two drawings open, it does list it here. Let's take the filter off. There's the Uniformat. Over there, there's nothing. I'm wondering if one can perhaps copy and paste the Uniformat classification system across, and indeed you can. So if you have more than one project open, you can do that. And alternatively, I've just cancelled that. I just want to make sure that our property sets are empty in here. Let's take the filter off. There's no classification within this drawing. And let's see if we can then use the SHP utility to import. Again, we'll execute the import. And we'll bring in the Uniformat from there. Let's see the effect that that has on our defined property sets. Filter off. And the classification was not brought in. So, having failed, I would then suggest that you just copy and paste the definitions that you create in your template onto your drawings if necessary, and that will avail the drawing of your everything is like it should be. It applies to everything, so it brought that through. That's great. And then if we select that pipe, and then we can go to the extended data. The Uniformat is there, and we can go and set the property as plumbing domestic water cold water service, and the element will then have its data, exactly what we want. Right, so this seems to be the way to go with Civil 3D to codify three-dimensional elements and for us to leverage them downstream. We use property sets and extended data which are applicable to our 3D elements. I hope that you found this informative, and until next time, enjoy Civil 3D.